I was born in Amsterdam, Holland in 1947, 2 years after World War II. I don't remember a lot about it. We moved to a town that was about 7 miles from the German border, and that's where we immigrated from. Was Enschede was the name of the town. My parents were very, very active in the Second World War. My father was very active in helping find places, families, Jewish families, the underground. He worked in the underground during the war. He met my mother. My mother was divorced with a young child, my brother, and they met during the war. Holland was devastated by the war. And so there were, jobs were few, and it was a hard time for people even after the war. And so my father had read an article on being able to immigrate. If you found a sponsor to either Canada or New Zealand, then you could immigrate to one of those two places. The sponsor was to provide work for a full year and also a place for you to live. And so my father was always, he was an adventurer. In fact, we ended up moving probably every 2 years because my dad was always looking for something better. But that brought us to Canada. And so we immigrated to Canada in 1952. We landed in Halifax, and then our sponsor was in Alberta, Canada. None of us could speak English except my dad. He could speak English pretty well, and I shouldn't say pretty well, but enough to get by. And my mom ended up learning how to read and write. She started her own health food book and Bible store, health food stores were not that popular back then in the 60s. And she started and was very successful in that. And then my dad came home one day and said, Billy, I think we should move to Montana. And so she packed up her health food store and sold it and moved to Montana. So they were very principled people, my mom and dad. My mother was, you would describe her as had a very childlike faith. She just took it for granted that this was the way it was, and she was steady as she goes. Nothing, my mom was, I don't think I ever saw her down, no matter what. And there were a number of times that she could have been knocked down, but it never was. Our house burnt down a year after we immigrated, didn't faze her a bit. And I never saw her unhappy about anything. She was just very upbeat. My father was a zealot. He was up and down. He told stories. He would say, I'll just shake a story out of my sleeve. And he would shake his sleeve, and out would come this wonderful story. And my kids were able to enjoy stories that my dad would tell too. My dad would give his life for something that he thought was right. He would stand up for things that he thought were wrong. What I think I appreciated most about my father was that he was always searching for truth. He never felt like he had all of it, but was always looking for it. And so his search, I think ended when he passed away. My brother was my hero. He was 8 years older than I was, and he was just my hero. He died a kidney transplant that was not successful a few years ago. My mom and dad both were very religious. Our family was, I think everybody would say that we were very strict. There was no alcohol in our home. There was no smoking. Well, I take that back. My uncle smoked regularly in the house. There was no jewelry. It sounded very, very strict if I tell people, but it didn't feel strict because my family was just full of love. And we often had kids or people staying with us that weren't part of our family. As a matter of fact, when I was in grade 7, there was a girl at my school that didn't look like she was well taken care of, and she was in 3rd grade, and I invited her home for the weekend, and she ended up staying until she went to college. And she's my sister. We were never legally adopted her, but she's my sister. Her mother died when she was being born. She was the youngest of 10 children, and we're not related in any way. She kept her maiden name. Both parents, her father and my father, walked her down the aisle when she got married because she loved both of us. She and her family come out here every summer now. They've fallen in love with Cottonwood, and we go fishing every summer. My sister and I are close. We go on cruises together, and I wish I could say that none of it was a rocky road, but it was. We fought like sisters when she came to live with us, but we are very good friends now. So when I went to college, and I went to college at Walla Walla College, now Walla Walla University, and it was a church college. It was the church that we went to at that time. A lot of the kids went to that college, so that's why I went there. And then Greg came over from Wyoming, and so I was from Alberta, and he was from Wyoming. And interesting how we met. It was between classes, and I was standing on the sidewalk talking to a friend of mine, Neil, and he was having a tough time with his girlfriend. She was giving him no end of grief. And so he was asking my opinion. He was saying, what should I do? Should I break up with her? What should I do? And so we're in this conversation, and up walks Greg, who I'd never met before, and just kind of barges into our conversation. Well, he's standing there just kind of listening to us, but he knew Neil. I didn't know that he knew Neil. And I'm wondering, who are you? And he is saying exactly the opposite of what I'm saying. I'm saying, oh, give her a chance, try and work things out. And he's saying, dump her. He's saying that. I thought, why are you even in this conversation? So I was not really impressed. But Neil apparently, he was in a German lab with Neil. And so Neil was late. And so he was getting Neil to go to the German lab with him. And so that's why he was in this conversation. But then shortly after that, he came and sat with us, with a girlfriend of mine that he knew. And he came and sat with us in the cafeteria. And I'll tell you what, it was like I knew very, very quickly that he was different. He was just exactly the conversations that we would get into, and what he says he means. There's no guessing. He's just that's who he is. He's very authentic, and he's very what you see is what you get. And we've been married. It'll be 49 years in August, and I am so fortunate to have met him, and he's I would rather do things with him than anybody. He's my best friend, and people will roll their eyes when we say we don't fight, but we don't. That doesn't mean we don't have different of opinions, but he's my buddy. We got married in Bozeman, Montana in 1971, and my mom and dad were actually living in Billings, Montana, which is about 150 miles away, something like that. Well, Billings was a big town, and so I was the one that got all the tuxedos and everything else, and then we were going to transport them to Bozeman. Well, I didn't realize that tuxedos didn't come with shirts. I just assumed that it was a package deal, right? And so the night before the wedding, so we were 150 miles away from anything. Well, Bozeman had some stores, but they didn't have a tux rental store at that time. And so we're 150 miles away from everything. And Friday night, Greg takes a look at we're getting married Sunday, I think it was. And Friday night, Greg said to me, where are the shirts for the tuxedos? And I'm going, shirts for tuxedos? And he said, you didn't order them? And I said, I just thought they came with the suit. So we called Billings. And well, first of all, we thought, well, let's just look around in Bozeman and see if there's any shirts, white shirts to go with the tuxedos. They didn't have a white shirt at that time because everything, the fashion at that time in 1971 was guys all wore colored shirts. And so there was pink and there was blue and there was yellow, but there were no white shirts. So we quickly called Billings and said, can you get them here? And so they put them on a Greyhound bus, and otherwise they'd have gone shirtless, because I don't think Greg would have gotten into a pink shirt for the wedding. So they got there at, I think, around midnight. The buses finally got there, and the shirts were there, and so everything was okay. The other thing was my wedding cake. We got it at a local grocery store, and so my brother went to go pick it up. And this is the night before the wedding, and my brother gets it out of its box, and it must have been warm still because he took it out and the top 2 layers of the cake slid off the bottom. So it was this mess, just a splat of cake. And we didn't have any money, so we were not having anything but cake and coffee and tea. That's all we were going to have for our wedding. So people, and a few nuts and mints because we had no money. And so here was cake that was this mess on this table. So a gal that we knew called the grocery store and said, we need another cake. And they said, sorry, we're not making another wedding cake. I don't know what she said to them, but they made me a better cake than I even ordered. So that ended up okay too. My mother and I were going to make my wedding dress because my family never had a lot of money. I never felt like we were poor but I think we probably were, but it never felt that way. But my mom and I were going to make my wedding dress. So my brother and his wife came down and they'd never met Greg before. And my brother was always hypercritical of any boy that I brought home. He was always hypercritical. So I was with Greg, I told Greg, because Greg had his hair long like the Beatles did back then, you know. And so I said, okay, my brother's a policeman. He wears his hair really short. Do me one favor because it's so important that my brother like you, right? So I said, just go get your hair cut. And he said, oh, no problem. So he went to go get his hair cut because he's nervous about meeting my brother too, because I knew my parents would love him, but my brother, that was the important one. So my brother gets there before Greg gets back from the haircut. And we're standing there on the lawn waiting, and all of a sudden Greg pulls out and he gets out of the car and my brother looks at him and he says, well, he looks like a nice guy, but he needs a haircut. So that was the beginning of that. But then we were getting married, that was June, and we were going to get married in August. And so I said my brother asked me, so tell me about your wedding dress. Have you bought your wedding dress yet? And I said, no, Mom and I are going to make it. And he said, oh, really? And have you started? No, but we're going to do it. So anyway, he said to his wife, he said, he said, I think there's a bridal shop. He said, we passed a bridal store. He said, maybe you and Lynn should go take a look at that. You know, maybe you can give her, because she was going to be a bridesmaid. And maybe go take a look at what she's at. Well, fine, you know, great. And so Anita and I went in and she said, what dress have you looked at? And I showed her and she said, put it on, let's look at it. And then she said, have you looked at your veil? Do you know what you want to wear for headdress, headgear, whatever? And I said, no, I hadn't really. And she said, well, let's just play around a little bit. And we did. And when I had it all on, she said, is this how you want to look on your wedding day? And I said, yeah. And she said, it's yours. And she bought everything. They bought everything for me. That was my brother. That was just my brother. After we got married, Greg still had a year of school. And so I had graduated and I was teaching. I taught at Walla Walla Business College and Walla Walla Community College Night School. I taught bookkeeping and that kind of stuff, shorthand and things like that. And then after Greg graduated, our first job together was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I taught business ed classes and Greg math and science. And I got pregnant with Amanda in New Mexico, and oh, she was this absolutely beautiful baby. Big blue eyes and just this beautiful little round face. Greg's father is a doctor in Powell, Wyoming, and he actually delivered both kids. He delivered Amanda and he delivered Josh 17 months later. So we were living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then the next year we wanted to be closer to my family, and they were living in Alberta at that time. And so we moved to British Columbia, and I got pregnant with Josh. They're 17 months apart, so it was almost like having twins, but we wanted it that way. We wanted only 2 children. We were very committed to not overpopulating, so replacing us 2 was what we wanted to do. And our kids, they played really, really pretty well together. And they're totally different kids in so many ways, but yet there's a thread that is there between the 2 of them. We love spending time with our kids. They're fun to be with. They are great conversations. You know, we play games together. We just love hanging out together with them and have, I think, ever since they were little, you know, just really good times. really good times. Okay, so then we were living in British Columbia, and then Greg went back to school in Walla Walla to get his master's in administration. And then we got a job offer in Alaska, and so we ended up living in Alaska for 6 years. Absolutely loved it. We lived in a small town out in the country. Life was idyllic in Alaska, but knew that we wanted to move back outside so the kids could bond with family because we were away from cousins and nieces, we were away from family. And I guess for me it wasn't that hard because I was always away from family. But for Greg's it was time to move out. So we got a job to Salt Lake City, and we never really loved Salt Lake City because it's a city. And so we were there for 10 years. And it worked out okay because I taught business ed classes at a junior high, but I always kind of wanted to do the counseling. And so then I went back and got my master's in school counseling. Well, not went back, I taught and did classes at night. And by then the kids were in college. And so then we always wanted out of Salt Lake City to go to a small town. And it was harder for me to get a job because you only need maybe one school counselor, right? Greg can do a lot of different things. We got online and looked for a job for me. And there were about 5 different places, I think, that I did like an interview weekend and came up here. And as we crested over the prairie from Kamiah, as we're looking over, Greg said to me, "Sweetheart, this better be a really awful job here for you not to accept it. This is heaven." And then we interviewed, and as Stan Kress is driving us up to the high school, we noticed that he's waving to everybody. And we said, "Do you just know everybody here?" And he says, "No, this is what we do in our town. It's everybody waves." And we absolutely fell in love. I mean, we fell in love with the town, with the people, and many people have asked us, "Are you going to stay after retirement?" And we said, we'll try a year or 2 after retirement because we love it here, but our kids are far away. But we love it here. This is home. I didn't spend any time talking about my granddaughter. Back up. I have the most amazing granddaughter. Her name is Charlotte Valentine, and she's my Charlie, and we bonded from the very beginning. What was so interesting about Charlie is when I had my children, we didn't do ultrasounds, so it was a surprise to what we were going to have. They guessed, but it was always a surprise. With Charlie, my daughter sent me the ultrasound of when she was right after she was conceived, and I fell in love with that little dot on the screen right then, totally head over heels. She is just such a delightful child. She's an only child, and she loves to sing. She loves to dance. She's just, I don't know what, I can't say enough about Charlie, my Charlie. I have such a good life. I had great parents, great examples. I couldn't be married to someone that I love more. I am so fortunate that he came and interrupted that conversation so many years ago, and that I got to know him better. Yeah, I have a good life, wonderful children, and an amazing granddaughter.